This is update for April 10, 2023, day 411 of the war and of the date update. It's also update for April 9. And actually, I'm going to start with April 9, and French president made the waves, news headlines, when he actually, after return from China trip, from meeting with Chinese president, he said that Europe needs to be more independent from the US, specifically with respect to energy, US dollar, and military equipment manufacturing. And also that Europe should stay away from getting more dragged into conflict between the US and China over Taiwan. So this has really created huge irritation and, let's say, anger in the US. So first, US Senator from Florida, Rubio, came out and criticized French president. Then it really sort of degenerated into like very primitive accusations in the U.S. media, where French president was called fool and really kind of like very low. Let's put it this way. However, if we really think about this situation, it's actually I said before that Chinese are very delusional about trying to basically put a crack in the West, and actually they were partially, I would say, successful. I have to say this, and apparently they knew where to strike, and the only way I could explain this is that this is probably French revenge for losing contract for submarines for Australia. If you remember, I think it was like a couple of years ago. Basically, France was simply kicked out from the contract to deliver submarines to Australian Navy, and was replaced with the U.S. And then the whole alliance was arranged, and France was not sort of I'd say was not invited, was not there was no discussion with France, so it was kind of like left behind. And apparently that made that's probably a result of that. So there is always there are always consequences for the unthoughtful actions, and that's probably one of those. The importance of France is that it's one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council of the United Nations. Essentially, you can think that Security Council really almost like runs United Nations, and so far there was vast majority there, because there is U.S., U.K., France versus China and Russia. Now, sort of France becomes kind of like in the middle, neutral. Probably still going to be more siding with the West. Definitely not, moving towards China or Russia, but it's asserting more independent position, which probably in the interest of France. There's no question about it. But at the same time, the whole situation is, calls for more unity. So in a way, it's the damage has been done like probably 2-3 years ago, and now this is sort of how to say, you reap what you sow, basically, situation. Then a little bit about China, a little bit more. I spoke yesterday about the rare earth metals, and I said that China really controls essentially that market. I said it was like 50%. I just looked it up. It's actually they control 67% of the total world output, or 67 up to 70, somewhere in that ballpark. So you can imagine, as soon as they stop export of rare earths, literally all high tech, everything stops in the West. So that's why it's so not this situation is very explosive and dangerous, not only because China has a large military force, has nuclear bombs, but it also has a huge leverage with rare earth metals, and essentially there is no way to replace China in short term, because it's mining. It requires capex. It takes years to basically build new mine and so on. So not even years. It's like 3, 4, 5 years. Usually like 5. It could be even 7. So you cannot really ramp up any quickly. So in the case of conflict, of serious conflict, this is going to be a huge problem for the West and for the world, because also all of this so-called alternative or green energy, it heavily relies on rare earth metals. So for example, like bearings in the wind turbines could be using rare earth metals. So essentially, all of the, and I mentioned before that solar panels, I think like 70% of them are made in China. So obviously all of that stops immediately, and all of this, as I say, so-called alternative energy is essentially moot point and dead on arrival. At the same time, there is still, I would say, the leadership in the West stubbornly pushing for sort of this, call it suicidal path. And for example, the news is from this time from the US. There is desire, or I think the US president is calling to have 67% of all passenger vehicles by 2032 as electrical vehicles. It's sort of similar to what's going on in the European Union. I think it was like a couple months ago in the European Union, where they were saying like we're switching totally to electric vehicles, I think starting like 2035 or something like that. Then recently they started realizing it's not realistic, it's not real, and they tried to roll it back, and what's going to happen, nobody knows. But as time comes closer, it will be more and more clear that this transition has failed, and there is no way, or the alternative is transition to medieval ages. That's what's really this transition is going to happen, where it's going to lead. And in that case, basically China and Russia and Iran win by default. They don't really even need to do anything, because the West will transition to the medieval ages. It will be easily and quickly conquered by these countries. There's also interesting piece of information from Poland. So there was a poll there among the obviously Polish population, and the question was, if Russia attacks Poland, what are you gonna do? And 31% of Poles said that they will flee immediately. Literally will not do anything, just pack up and probably go to Germany. And only 21% of the Polish people said that they will fight. So as you can see, the numbers are pretty bad. But at the same time, this number is actually extremely great relative to Germany. I've seen the poll for Germany, like I think from summer, and there was like 3, 4, 5% willing to fight, and like more like really high numbers, more than 50% will flee. So what this really tells us is there is no, in many countries, and I cannot speak for all of them because I haven't seen the polls, but I would say this is probably fairly representative. There is no sense of ownership among the ordinary citizens in most countries in the West, and therefore there is no desire to defend the system where they live. They sort of kind of let it happen, let it sort of exist, but that's not something that they're willing to sacrifice their lives for, which is very troubling and very concerning sign overall. And I'm sure that Russia and China, they all also monitor this information. They're fully aware of the internal rot in the West, which also emboldens them to attack, because they know that the popular desire to resist is, I would say, very small, and that's why you frequently hear these voices of we need to have a peace with China, peace with Russia. Let's go back to how it used to be. And unfortunately, those voices are really like a siren calls to go to something that already does not exist and will never exist, because at this point the things are set in motion from perspective of China, Russia, Iran, and countries that sort of silently support them to change the world order into their favor, which from their perspective this is it's unfavorable to them, unfair, and so they're willing to do what it takes to change it, to redesign it in the way that sort of favors them. I guess obviously it's never going to be fair. It's going to be, someone will pull the blanket on themselves, and this time China, Russia, and the company want to pull the blanket on themselves. Then let's go a little bit. And then I just want to add to this why it's very concerning, because if you really analyze why Nazi Germany and Hitler was so successful at the beginning of the World War II, and specifically with respect to France and the Soviet Union, is exactly for the same reason, where people did not want to defend the system where they lived. And those were main reasons why he was so like sort of hitting as a hot knife through the butter in both countries, and have had huge successes initially military wise. And so this again, that's why it is so concerning, this whole situation. Now let's switch a little bit to Russia. There's a little bit of information about Russian crude oil exports, so to India specifically this time. So in March, the daily export was 1.64 million barrels per day, which is actually, I think, somewhat increased. It used to be like around 1 million, so now it's 1.6. So as you can imagine, it's established strong economic linkage there at this point, and it's very clear it goes to India, but then it also goes back to the West in the form of refined products. Essentially, some of it goes to Europe, some of it goes to the US. Then a little bit more about Russia. So as you probably aware, Russia is evading all of the sanctions by using its neighbors, and one of them is Belarus, which is essential extension of Russia. Then they use Kazakhstan, they use Georgia, Armenia, they use Kyrgyzstan. Basically, most of the former Soviet republics, with obviously some Baltic states are exception, Ukraine exception, and I believe Azerbaijan is exception. The rest is sort of fair game, and it's so much of the goods are flowing through all of these neighboring countries that logistical and warehouse system under complete strain in all of these countries, completely full, basically barely able to deal with the amount of Russian import that's essentially happening, and that's another reason why you're seeing Russian ruble going down versus U.S. dollar. Then a little bit more about Russia. It's political top overhauling its military draft system. In September, it has shown to be completely inefficient. Effectively, it's non-existent. It was sort of destroyed. So Soviet Union had very I would say, perfected system, very well functioning system, and it obviously was destroyed after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So effectively, Russia had non-existent system. Then there is realization, okay, it doesn't work. So finally they almost done passing the law that overhauls it and effectively tighten the screws. If don't sort of respond to call to the army, you're not going to be allowed to leave Russia. For those who are not aware, there is like at least couple million Russians, obviously male, who fled Russia starting in September, October, November, and settled in the neighboring countries because they didn't want to get drafted into the military. Usually, those are more high skilled, not workers, but let's say producers. People, many of them are self-employed, many doing programming jobs and so on. So a lot of them basically fled Russia and sort of living and working in the neighboring countries. So to prevent this from happening again, they basically closing the borders, and there is a lot of other sort of like removal of the civil rights from you, like to the point that you cannot sign any contract. You basically economically, let's say, incapable of doing anything. So that's sort of the essence of the law. Or another step here is that not many, actually all Russian government officials or all military officials, they are not allowed to leave Russia at this point. Their foreign passports were sort of taken away, and you can go outside of Russia only from permission. So it really like return of the Soviet Union in its worst shape. And for those who are not familiar with the local system in the Soviet Union, late Soviet Union, let's put it this way, and now in Russia and Ukraine, most of the countries, there are two passports. One is sort of internal that you use for everything, like to do literally everything you need. And then to leave the country, you have the external passport. And so these external passports are taken away from these government officials, so they don't leave the country, I guess. Then last point on the actual U.S. There is news that U.S. Wants to send its government officials to convince European countries, European companies to leave Russia because it's not how to say discussed in the Western media, but there's a lot of Western companies who still continue working in Russia and don't actually. I would say majority of the Western companies never left Russia. Only, the most sort of famous due to reputation damage, potential damage, they left Russia. But many medium-sized companies, small-sized companies, they work in Russia. They don't care, and they have no intent from leaving Russia because it's obviously right now very profitable for them. As you can imagine, I guess I don't need to explain why. There are also larger companies who don't have really ties to the US or exposure to US. They just completely disregard that and they continue working in Russia. So, for example, is Raiffeisen Bank, which is I think largest Austrian bank. And essentially, this is sort of window for Russian businesses and consumers to basically wire money outside of the country, receive money from outside, and do payments and everything outside of Russia. There are a couple more like that. I think there's Auchan. It's a French supermarket chain similar to, like, let's say, U.S. Walmart. They still, working in Russia, and I believe they don't have intent. They sort of They want to stay there. I'm sure there are more. This is like sort of really large businesses, but there are thousands of smaller ones that work there. And so U.S. wants to push them to leave Russia, which I think is really misguided attempt, misguided push, because uh, demanding something or sort of being dictator never works. U.S. cannot offer them any economic incentives to leave, and therefore there is no point of doing that. And so this whole visit is probably is going to be failure, disappointment, because as I explained, it's always about economic incentives. And if there's no economic incentive, this especially small businesses and medium-sized businesses, for them that might be sort of question of death or survival. They obviously, nobody will choose death on their own, and so that's just what it is there. Now let's switch to Ukraine, and let's actually jump into the walking through the front line. I'll do it in a clockwise fashion, the way I always do. So the situation along the state border is more or less the same. What an interesting observation is that Russia started attacking bridges near the border on Ukrainian side over the rivers, and basically using rocket attacks and blowing those bridges up. And so far they're successful. And what this really tells is that they want to make sure they're not going to be. They understand there will be some offensive, let's say on the sort of regular front line, and they want to be able to freely pull all of their resources to that, to the main front line, and not to be worried that Ukraine can attack sort of directly Russian territories through the border. And so they're blowing up those bridges to make sure that doesn't happen, essentially. Almost forgot about this whole scandal about the leaked information from the U.S. military about Ukrainian sort of plans, preparedness, and all of that. And I would say that it's really much ado about nothing, because all of those plans, this is just a primitive infographics that's essentially useless. You can, if you do analytics, you can gather it from most of that information from the, open sources, and then you can use your brain to analyze and make a lot of similar conclusions. Actually, could be better conclusions. So most of it is essentially like not really a secret. It's like for anyone who spends time and has a mental ability to analyze all of that information, more or less sort of obvious and clear. So where sort of the significance of this event is actually that the leakage itself, right? That there is that basically U.S. military does not have good handle on the secrets, and that's a really sign of weakness, and that's how it's perceived by, let's say, everybody, right? Like including what most importantly Russia and China. They perceive that there is even internally there is not, the U.S. military is not in good order because it leaks. So this is where the importance of this leak is not so much about what was leaked. It's just, sort of everybody knows, sort of it's not a secret to anyone. But the problem is the leak itself, and that's a huge damage to the West as a whole. Let's put it this way. So sorry to sidetrack a little bit because I forgot, and I think it's important and really not sort of discussed from this angle in the media or elsewhere. And I think I just want to provide another sort of viewpoint there. Now let's jump to the North Lugansk front line. Things here are effectively more or less quiet. There are sort of formal small-scale attacks here against the bridgeheads, but they really, how to say, distraction attacks. They're really not anything major. It's this section of the front line are more or less sort of quiet, not as quiet as, let's say, Zaporizhya front line, but very close. Let's put this way. Now let's jump to the North Donbass front line. Things here very similar to where it used to be a couple days ago. Essentially, the Wagner mercenaries are really focused very, very narrowly on capturing Bahmut, or capturing the western part of the Bahmut. And uh, what it tells us is they don't have enough resources, so they pull from everywhere to create a high concentration in very small, stretch on the front line in order to be able to be successful. So again, this is like last hurrah, last push. They really pushing themselves as much as they can. They making some small progress. They capturing another sort of 100 meters of the a couple quarters, but really it's I don't know how to say Pyrrhic victory. I really I would say almost even if they sort of once probably they capture Bakhmut, it's essentially going to be dead end and essentially let's say empty victory, or like victory that leads to nowhere essentially. This is how it was sort of essentially was happening. As I said before, at this point fighting is happening along this railroad line, and as we speak the most intense fighting is happening around the central railroad station in Bakhmut. But as you can see, Ukrainian forces almost squeezed out from Bakhmut. This is how it was happening over time. So again, this is the same very narrow focus on Bakhmut, and then a little bit of supporting attacks to kind of keep pressure a little bit on the flank of Ukrainian troops, but essentially otherwise everything is quiet. Now let's move to central Donbass front line. Things here are, as like always, the same. Attacks in Marinka, then attacks out of the Pisky salient with the idea to squeeze Ukrainian troops from Avdiivka salient now for Ukrainian side, and that's why you see these attacks here. So this is just going back to this whole situation. So again, here Russian troops trying to go north, and here they attacking from sort of east, in very straightforward plan. There's no question about it. I'd say at this point, if we really look at this, the more dangerous is actually this attacks that's sort of going sort of northwest, because it creates even bigger sort of overhanging shadow for the Ukrainian troops in Avdiivka. And so again, this is needs to be watched if this, because this attack here towards Keramik and Novokalinovo, this two villages here, and that would be important, let's put this way. This is how it used to be at the very beginning. So now let's just jump to Zaporizhya front line. Things here are the most quietest out of the all section of the front line. So again, there's no sort of brainer, not rocket science to understand that the most likely section of the front line where Ukrainian side will be seeking, I would say, decisive success is probably going to be Zaporizhya. And so that's why I said, when I repeat it again, leakage of those documents is essentially the content of the documents is essentially useless. And they don't even really look like a proper military documents. They look like some infographics that just for people who actually don't like, how to say, with no military background. Let's put this way. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Until next time. Bye bye.